Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence of the divine principle as the only reality. In this show, we will separate the wheat from the tares, the mental material illusion from the spiritual fact of true being, how to recognize the difference between karmic or material law and divine law. Listen as we discuss the statement of Jesus from Matthew chapter 22, verses 20 and 21. I'll read it. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. End of the verses. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be heard. Swami, the title of today's episode is Why God is Beyond Google. Can you tell us what was your inspiration for this particular title?
Yeah, I think my inspiration was I was introduced to Gemini on Google Chrome, and I found it to be very helpful with regard to doing research on numerous things. Even started to use it to review our radio shows. As I began to become more and more comfortable with using it, I also wanted to examine what are the pros and cons of having some machine do your thinking for you. And I think on a positive level, as Jesus told us, be ye perfect as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Using the computer elevates our standard of living. The mental material concept is aspiring for a better outcome. We're no longer accepting things that are imperfect. The other side of it is, as an organism, our minds are designed to be used. And the more we use them, just like any muscle in your body, the stronger they get and the more elastic they function. So if we are sitting around and we're using a machine to do our thinking, it could set up a limitation as far as my ability to do that. The other major thing that inspired this show was when we were talking about the difference between God and Google. The major difference between God or spirit and mental material is spirit is whole and mental material is in half. Spirit is absolute and mental material is rational or dualistic by nature. Spirit abides under the divine law of absolute goodness. And mental material resides under the karmic law or material law, where one is infinite and the other is finite. Spirit is perfect, whole, eternal, and changeless, while matter and mortal mind are under the belief in two powers. They are imperfect, incomplete, temporary, in constant change. As Western science says, underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void. To analyze the statement, we can break it into matter, mind, and spirit. Everything in half comes under the heading of duality, and everything whole comes under the heading of absolute. Once we have separated the wheat from the tares, we can see the comparison isn't apples to apples. This is what Mary Baker Eddy called educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. By developing a mental landscape and value system which support the divine principle. And even though I do think artificial intelligence of any kind has its place, I do like what Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and the things which are God's to God.
Swami, could you just dive a little bit deeper with what you just said? Render things that are Caesar's and unto God the things that are God's. Can you help us put that into a perspective that we could understand?
Yeah, I think this was Jesus's way of telling us to separate the wheat from the tares. We have to know the difference between mental material and spiritual. Understand the only thing that is real and true is spirit, and mental material of any kind is the error. It's an illusion, a reflection. And as long as we continue to believe that it's real, we actually give it the life it doesn't have. It is our belief in whatever it is we are perceiving that perpetuates this regressive cycle. What we call in yoga the cycle of death and rebirth. It goes on long after the body expires until we know the truth. Once we know the truth, the only thing that is real is the invisible, intangible omnipresence, then we're no longer under the government of karmic or material law.
So, what would it look like if we were to separate the wheat from the tares?
Yeah, like I was saying, you have to separate mental material from spiritual. Like Jesus says, you can't serve two masters. If we believe we're a finite mortal being, then we can't understand we are the image and likeness of the divine principle. As you start to apply this and you're developing that mental landscape and value system that's in accordance with universal order, when you're looking at what's visible and tangible, you have to understand it as the lie. By the same token, how can you look at that and realize that's not the divine principle? It doesn't have divine qualities. So do I just deny it? And the best way and proactive way to do this is to tell the truth about the lie and then maintain telling the truth about the truth. Learning how to pierce through the appearance and perceive the spiritual fact of being. And again, like we say, you have to develop the faculty that enables you to perceive the divine creation, the mind of Christ. And that's a process that must be initiated, which begins with rebirthing your body and spirit.
So, Swami, tell us the reason that God is beyond Google.
Yeah, I think the main reason is because, and it becomes more evident when information is put into different perspectives and reality is understood from multidimensional categories with proper orientation to levels of consciousness and degrees of awareness. We do this in Kriya Yoga by knowing the difference between mental material and spiritual awareness, which translates to knowing the difference between thinking and knowing. As we build the case for God beyond Google, we are creating an understanding between matter and mind, or mortal mind and spirit. to help us grasp the meaning of the scriptural command to sow to the spirit and not to the flesh.
So, Swami, for us to be able to follow that scriptural command to sow to the spirit, it can be really difficult for us because we do have to live this life. We have to eat, we have to buy things. And so we're constantly being pulled out of sowing to the spirit. So how do we go about changing that? What do we have to do?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I really like the Kriya Yoga, because we work with the physical body. I resonate to Mary Baker Eddy's teachings of Martha Wilcox, the idea of faithful and orderly with the objects of sense, make us receptive to the deeper things of the divine principle. We're not trying to make ourselves spiritual. We are trying to come out of the belief we're not. And by mastering the mind-body complex, we gain control. What we're experiencing is our thought about what's here. And what you will learn is the mind can't free itself from its own creation. By mastering, distilling, purifying, and perfecting yourself physically and mentally, you can eventually overcome this world. You can overcome what was called the son of perdition, corporeal sense functioning in human consciousness. And when you have done that, then you can walk reason through the open door of revelation, allowing God to do its knowing in your awareness. Mary Baker Eddy called this to think with God as God. The more you understand this isn't an academic or intellectual accomplishment, that there's physics involved. If we don't rebirth the physical body in spirit and train the body to look for what's invisible and intangible as opposed to what is visible and tangible or invisible but tangible, then we continue to struggle with the conflict that happens between spirit and matter. But if you can get your body on board, where your body is no longer searching for something outside itself for completion, where your body can rest in knowing what it has is available to it, that calmness, that stillness affects how we're thinking. We're no longer reacting to the testimony of the corporeal senses. And with practice, we develop mental functions so we can make decisions based on a value system in accordance with universal order. And then, of course, you can overcome corporeal sense in human consciousness, which then enables you to walk through this world and not be tempted to believe what is appearing in your corporeal senses is anything more than a reflection or a thought about what's really here. From there, you can become a faithful witness to the divine creation, and then you graduate from being under the government of karmic law, material law, which is the belief in two powers, and now you're under the government of divine law. And in divine law, which is absolute goodness, there is no opposition. There's no trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, or asking. You rest in divine perfection.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners will be back with you in just a few moments. In Institute for Personal Development Incorporated is a Kriya Yoga ashram, offering yoga classes in all 8 stages of Kriya Yoga, including classes, personal training, teacher training, residential program, online live classes, and online products for self-discovery and transformation. Discover, learn, and practice one of the oldest and purest forms of yoga, Kriya Yoga, by uniting ancient religion with modern science. Visit www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. And welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I'm wondering about God and Google. We've been talking about, like, if you want to experience healing, we need to go within and not go outside of ourselves. Do you think it could possibly be a trap if we really have this reliance on Google or Gemini, because we're kind of going outside of ourselves? And can we really trust the information that we're getting from Google and Gemini? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important to be able to, again, separate the wheat from the tares. You know, whatever you get from Google is not going to be divine inspiration. Like you say, a big part of divine science is radical reliance on the omnipresent perfection of being. And you're developing a relationship with something that's pure, powerful, sacred, and totally reliable. A big part of your spiritual practice is being able to attune yourself to that. But I also think about, Mary Baker Eddy said something to the effect, for Jesus to walk on water was science. But before poor humanity can walk on water, for them to step out onto the Atlantic isn't wisdom or science. And so when you're starting out with this, you have to understand that until you have the faculty that perceives the divine creation, you are walking defenseless amongst these non-existent powers that seem to do harm. So approach this with your toe in the water, working with baby steps as far as starting with a belief in the divine omnipresence. And until you start to graduate to what was called faith, where your belief in the divine creation is starting to appear in the testimony of your senses. You're getting that coincidence between the human and the divine. At the same time, you've got to be very careful, because if you're doing this with human will and personal sense, you're doing it with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image. Even though you may be able to change finite bad to finite good, you're still under karmic law. What we want to do is, as Jesus said, know the truth. And we can't know the truth until we have the mind of Christ. So we have to initiate a process. Mortal mind must go through 3 stages of growth before we walk reason through the open door of revelation. So you can evaluate where you are based on, how are you thinking? Am I still working with the mortal mind? These 3 phases or these 3 modes of mortal thinking: instinct, appetite, preservation, and survival. Have I overcome fear? A very important point. If you're still struggling with reacting to the testimony of your senses, you have to know you are not born of spirit. You haven't internalized the invisible, intangible omnipresence as your symbol for validation. And so you've got to go back to the drawing board, because if you miss a step, you'll find there's no advancement, and you continue to work and do the same thing, expecting a different return. That's why I think it's very valuable to have the assistance of a tried and true divine metaphysical system. And if you notice, I use that term, divine metaphysical system. There's a difference between metaphysics and divine metaphysics. And one will lead you to initiating the process that will bring you from sense to soul, and the other one will keep you under the cycle of death and rebirth, constantly trying, striving, struggling, seeking, and planning, but you won't advance.
So what would be some of the advantages of us relying on this divine intelligence as opposed to Google and Gemini, this artificial intelligence?
Yeah, again, coming back to the concept of sowing to the spirit versus sowing to the flesh. If you're going to radically rely on the omnipresent divine principle, you have all of this put in place to receive divine revelation, starting with being able to resolve a physical form into a mental image capable of receiving divine inspiration. You will start to see the return on your effort bear dividends, because if you are receiving divine inspiration, living under the protection of divine law, the perfection of being, there's nothing you could do humanly that could compare to let divine mind take over the scientific government of your being. But like I say, there is a learning curve involved. So the biggest advantage is where it will bring you when you have transcended the limits of material law. But the trials and tribulations you will have to undergo to develop the rhythm of the spiritual practice might prove to be a little challenging.
Now, Swami, I know we've done other shows about artificial intelligence. What are your thoughts on some of the ones that we've done in the past?
Well, like I said, we've focused a lot on the pros and cons of it. It's helping us increase the standard to which we're living at, which I think is very important, because we must be striving to be perfect, but not as a human. We have to learn that we're not going to ever change matter and mind into spirit. Spirit is already here. What we really want to strive for is coming out of the belief in a temporary sense of life, and then let divine mind do its knowing in our awareness. Because when spirit is cause, creation is perfect. And so we're not against artificial intelligence. And as you say, we've done a couple of podcasts about artificial intelligence and the operation of divine mind, and have stated mortal mind is to divine mind what AI is to mortal mind. It is valuable to know in divine science there is a distinction between thinking and knowing, mental material and spiritual, duality two and unity one, error and truth, human and divine. And until we know the difference, typically we fall into the trap of thinking we're spiritual and not demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty.
Swami, we have a passage here from Mary Baker Eddy. She wrote in a paper titled Body, and I'll read it. Paul tells us not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. Our sufficiency to think is of God. Our ability to form thoughts and opinions is of our own ignorance, our belief in duality. But our power or sufficiency to think is when we think with God as God. From this basis, then, we see that man's wrong or ignorant beliefs and opinions and misinterpretations do not create or produce conditions in the body or in God's substance anywhere. End of the passage. Swami, what can we learn from this passage by Mary Baker Eddy?
Well, I think the main thing you could learn is what she continues to tell you in that paper. And I'll read that. Thinking with God as God shows me the perfection of the body, but the body is just as perfect before I know it as after. End of quote. We have to understand that God is running a perfect universe and that we are the reflection, we are the image and likeness of this divine principle. Now, when you're starting to build your mental landscape, it's very important to understand spirit is one. There's not all of us and we all have our own spirit and God is letting us do whatever it is we think we want to do. There's only one life here, and it's the life of God. And unless we come out of the belief of separation, the belief of a personal sense of existence, and awaken to that one life, the life of Christ, it's so important to know Christ is what makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. Without the Christ, we think we're spiritual, but thinking is the problem. Thinking is what produces the veil. So we have to learn to stop thinking, make our mind an avenue of awareness for the operation of divine mind, and then let divine mind do its knowing in our awareness. And so again, how do we think? In divine science, there are 3 modes of mortal thought and the operations of divine mind. So we have options, but for most of us, we're unconscious to the operations of divine mind, and we're muddling through one or all of these modes of mortal thought. I really like the way it's represented in Revelations, the dragon and 2 beasts. As we have said, mortal mind works in duality, in the rational or false sense of life, and divine mind knows the truth. Google and AI is the product of the mortal mind, which has the limitations of acquiring all its information from duality, which is imperfect by nature, limited to time and space. But the positive side, it is also void of human mental functions like feeling, instinct, appetite, personal sense, and fear. This may be a great value to humanity to see benefit, to thinking beyond the mortal mind to a more objective perspective without fear. Fear is the defense mechanism for the false sense of existence, and it must be overcome to move from thinking with 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses.
Swami, how does God think?
Yeah, God doesn't think in terms of duality. As the snake told Eve, you will know what God doesn't know. The mortal mind sees the mental material veil or illusion, but is blind to the truth, which is the divine creation. God doesn't form thoughts and opinions based on the premise of appearances, but God knows the absolute truth. God is running a perfect universe. Divine mind is too pure to behold iniquity. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. There isn't anything we can do humanly that could compare to the operations of divine mind. Everything we do with human will and personal sense is done under karmic or material law, which means it's dualistic. For every action, there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Even our good actions contain a complementary bad action. So when we do it, it can be done for good or bad. If divine mind does it, it can only be done for absolute goodness perfectly.
Swami, thank you for your insights for today's podcast titled, Why God is Beyond Google. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Once you're on the home page, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you could press to further your understanding. Swami, do you have any other final thoughts about today's podcast?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be heard. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.